Hi there, welcome to Access Module 1. I highly suggest as we go through this chapter that you follow along with this lecture, not only in your book, but also by completing the project. So you can split your screen so that you can watch the lecture on one half of the screen and follow along on the other half, or you could pull over a device, such as a phone or another computer or a tablet, and watch the lecture on that while you complete the lecture on your computer and follow along. I have found that this is the hardest chapter in this class, and that's basically because most people don't have much prior knowledge with creating and maintaining a database. You probably use databases every day in your real life, but chances are you're not building or creating those databases. You're just using them as is. So there's a little bit of a learning curve. So I highly suggest the more that you practice doing this, the more you practice editing and creating and changing, deleting things within a database, the easier it will be. So practice, 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 and definitely follow along as we go through this chapter. So let's get started.
There are databases all around us, and we use them a lot in our everyday world. We might just not realize that we use them. I'm sure that if you work for some kind of business, they have some sort of database. So let's use the example of Virginia Western. Virginia Western has something called a student information database. And in that database, it contains all the students. It contains their information, so their addresses, their phone numbers. It also contains things like whether or not they receive financial aid and how many classes they are taking. And then the database has other information in it. It has the classes that are being offered at Virginia Western. It also has information on the instructors, so their addresses, their phone numbers, how much they're being paid, how many classes they teach, which classes they teach. And then there's even information about which class is being held where and what time it's being held. And all those pieces of that database interact. So when you go in to register a class, those things interact, and the amount of credits that you are taking changes, whether or not you have taken the class before, it's checking for that. All sorts of things are interacting within that database to make everything run smoothly for the college. So let's use that as our example, but please know that they are everywhere. Hospitals use databases. Even somewhere like Walmart has a database where they have the inventory and their names of their employees and all of that kind of information. So we'll start by talking about the pieces of a database. So a database itself contains a lot of pieces, and those pieces are usually held in things called tables. So tables sort the important information. So if we look at Virginia Western as our example, there is a table for students that has all the student information. There's a table for instructors that has all the instructor information. There might be a table for classes and all the information about classes, those kind of things. The info is stored in tables. We enter info into those tables, but usually when you are entering info, you are looking at it through a form. So when you register to come to Virginia Western, you fill out something online. That's a form, and that information is then dumped into the table of prospective students. So those forms are neat ways to be able to enter info into the table. And then once you have your tables, you can pull information from those tables as needed. So the things that you pull are called queries or reports. They're basically the same thing. Let me give you an example. Say you have registered for all your classes and now you want to print a schedule. So you go in, you print a schedule so that you know which class you are taking, what time it starts, and what room it's in. That is considered a report. You've just run a report from the database. If I were to go in and maybe I needed to know everybody's phone number, I could go in and run something called a query. and take a look and find all of my students and pull out all their phone numbers so that if I need to call them, I can. Those things are considered queries and reports. One other example, when you want to print your grades or a transcript of your grades, that would also be considered a report. They're basically the same thing. They're just pulling info from multiple tables within that database to give you some information. Queries are a little bit rougher. Reports are a little cleaner. Those are the things that look a little bit nicer. Usually something that you may print out or present somewhere, but that is a report. So we will be working to learn how to make each of these things as well as use them as we go through this chapter, which is one of the reasons why that this chapter can be a little challenging. In our example, we will be creating a database for a vet that currently is using paper and pencil to keep track of their clients and the different procedures and appointments that they have. So the scenario is we will be taking that information and creating a database from it. I do recommend if you want to understand that a little bit better, that you read the first few pages of our chapter, because it will set up what we'll be doing for the rest of the time with this database, and it might help make it make a little bit more sense. To begin, I have gone ahead and started up Access. In the very beginning, I need to choose what kind of database I want to do. Do I want to use a template or not? In this case, we are going to be using a blank database because we are starting from scratch. Now, interestingly enough, this database or Access wants us to save the database from the very beginning. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But for right now, let's go ahead and name our database. It's going to be called CMF Vet. And you notice it is pointing already to the folder where it's going to save this database. I'm going to click the folder and control where it's going. And I'm going to choose my desktop for this. You can choose your desktop. If you're on your home computer, you can do it on your documents or USB drive, whatever works for you. But from the very beginning, you want to set up where that database is saving because it saves continuously. So as it's open in the background, things will be saving in it, and that's why you have to have a location for where it saves from the very beginning. So CMF Vets, I'll hit Create. I've already created this database once today just to practice with the chapter, so I am going to replace my existing file.